Another massive election. Is Michigan ready? We'll talk with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. And it's homecoming, not at a high school or a college. It's homecoming for Detroit. Today is Sunday, September 22nd, 2024, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Good to have you with us this morning. I doubt you needed reminders of how important Michigan is in this election cycle, but in case you did, here came the candidates last week. Donald Trump held a town hall in Flint, hosted by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Then on Thursday, Kamala Harris was in Farmington Hills, kind of appearing as a guest on the Oprah show. Oprah Winfrey had a long list of celebrities joining in, but Hillary Clinton can tell you that celebrity endorsements don't necessarily mean votes. Now, speaking of votes, absentee ballots in Michigan can go out 40 days before Election Day, which means those ballots will start going out in the mail this week. So coming up this morning, we're going to talk with Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson about what our expectations for the process should be this year. And we're also going to talk about her concerns over the safety of election workers, an issue she's been raising lately. A little later on this morning, we've got quite a few native Detroiters back in their hometown this weekend. They are here for the annual homecoming event, and there is a lot for them to see in Detroit just now. We'll talk with several of them who are always ready to say nice things about Detroit. All today on Flashpoint. All right, now a month and a half away from Election Day, and Michigan absentee ballots will actually hit the mail this coming week. Let's talk about that and a lot more with Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Good to have you back on the program.
Always good to be here. Thanks.
I want to start with something that you and your colleagues, election officials from a number of states this past week, were trying to put to bed this idea that and this will be a developing theme, all of the conspiracy theories that you have to deal with, but that illegal immigrants are somehow casting votes already.
Yeah, there's no evidence that anyone other than U.S. citizens are voting in our elections. That's across the board, and it's easily verifiable because who votes is actually a public record. So if there was evidence, and there have been organizations that have spent a lot of money trying to find it, we would know it, and we certainly would address it. And as we take seriously any evidence of someone who is ineligible to vote casting a ballot, but there's none. And so we are trying to get out in front and continue to remind people only U.S. citizens vote in our elections. We have many layers and checks in place to reaffirm people's citizenship at different points in the process. So we want people to know that's simply not happening. There's no evidence of it. And if it was happening, we would know about it and we would prosecute it.
You are continually trying to put out these kinds of fires. Just this week, a group called United Sovereign Americans put out a statement that said that you were party to 6,126 counts of voter fraud in last month's primary. That there were that many votes that were attached to more than one. That many voter numbers attached to more than one vote. I mean, these are the kind of things that you are dealing with every day, almost.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to throw accusations and allegations around. It's harder to back them up with facts. And so we welcome questions about the process, but we do try to look at evidence. And anytime there's evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, we will prosecute. But we won't entertain conspiracy theories that have no grounding in fact or evidence, because that just wrongly deflates citizens' confidence in our process, when in reality, election workers are working every day to ensure our processes are secure.
This goes beyond just sort of claims of misdeeds, though, because a state lawmaker, Matt Maddock, recently said that if Donald Trump is elected, you will be prosecuted for the way that you've overseen Michigan elections.
Yeah, it's interesting that statement came on the heels of the former president making a much more vitriolic accusation against election officials across the board that was very unnerving, but also we know not rooted in fact. The truth and the facts and the law are on the side of the reality, which is that our elections are secure, and election officials on both sides of the aisle can attest to that. And then again, anytime people feel there's wrongdoing, bring us the evidence and we will investigate it so that we can address it. But what often happens in these cases is allegations are thrown around, and then from that, threats of prosecution or worse manifest themselves. And it's really disheartening when you see lawmakers in the state repeat those accusations, because what that does is send a signal for folks to harm us and for folks to threaten us even beyond that. And it increases the vitriol through a direct line from the hateful threats to hateful acts. And that's why we have to, I think, turn down the volume and really recognize that there's no place for those types of threats.
In fact, you and your family went through a swatting experience this past week, which is, for those unaware of what swatting is, but police are called to your home for nothing really,
yeah.
but it causes a great deal of upset, obviously, for you and your family.
And a lot of it's unnerving, it's uncertain, it creates a state of anxiety and hypervigilance. And look, I'm a mom of a now 8-year-old son. When he sees police show up at our house, or if we're leaving and driving to school in the morning and there's 4 squad cars parked outside with people thinking that something is afoot or something is wrong with our house, that is scary for him, and that is scary for our neighbors who also have kids. And I think people just need to realize that there's really, it's very harmful. We know that I'm not the only one who's been dealing with these threats, but certainly I hope, and law enforcement has been wonderful at helping us to address these, but we hope there is accountability for whoever's behind these swatting attempts, because it really creates a sense of anxiety, hypervigilance, fear, and potential violence.
Well, in fact, you've talked a number of times lately about your concern about the safety of election workers. We have seen just what you've described. We've seen a kidnapping attempt or plot around our governor.
Yeah.
We've seen 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
Talk about your level of concern about people who are not necessarily out front as, for instance, like a candidate, but the people who are just trying to do their jobs on election day.
Yeah, I mean, we're in an era of political violence, very unfortunately. We're also in an era of misinformation and deceptive practices and false allegations being made against election officials. And there's a direct line between those false allegations and the potential for those threats or some of the very real things we're experiencing. And so I think people, particularly elected leaders, need to understand their culpability and be on notice that when they throw these lies and allegations around, there are consequences, and there are very real consequences for the lives of the professionals who are charged with protecting the security of the elections to begin with. And so I am concerned about disruptions that don't just target me or election officials, but potentially even poll workers and voters. But we've been working with law enforcement, first responders, the Justice Department, FBI, and a number of other entities to protect the process. And we've passed laws in Michigan to make it a crime to threaten an election official. So we're doing what we can to mitigate the harm, but the harm is still there.
Let's talk about some problems that do exist. We have these bloated voter rolls where there are, we know people move, people die. And many states have trouble trying to keep their voter rolls current. But in Michigan, the problem has seemed extra acute. We have ours are way overloaded. Talk about the progress of trying to.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, we've done more in the last 5 years to remove ineligible citizens from our rolls. Hundreds of thousands of ineligible people who've moved, who've passed away, who otherwise are ineligible to vote. Hundreds of thousands of those have been removed. I can't speak to leaders before me and what they did or didn't do, but we've been very hypervigilant about this issue, and it's one of the reasons we're ranked number 5 in the country for actually increasing the accuracy of our voter rolls. And because of that, I think
where's that ranking? I haven't seen
the
that.
Election Assistance Commission,
okay.
And it was cited by a federal judge as well in a lawsuit over whether or not we were doing everything we can to remove deceased voters from the rolls. We actually do many things. We work with Social Security death records every week. Our local clerks, every time they get a death notice, remove that person from the rolls. And so we're doing more than ever before to increase the accuracy of our rolls. And also in a lot of that chatter, there's not a recognition of the difference between inactive and active voters. Active voters are 7.1 million in the state of Michigan. That's less than the total population. But when you add in inactive voters who are slated for removal under federal law, they are about to be removed from the rolls. When you add those numbers in, then you do get the inflation numbers that you hear thrown around.
Right.
And so we try to help people see the difference between people who are active voters and those who are inactive or slated for cancellation. And that means they're about to be removed because there's evidence that they're not eligible.
Another problem, and you obviously cannot speak directly to this because we have kind of a decentralized system, local control over elections. But we go back to just what happened in the primary here in August. And the wait for results in both the city of Detroit and Wayne County were kind of unconscionable, I think, to a lot of people. It's a long-running problem. Is there nothing that can be done, especially now that we've added this layer of so many, with the absentee ballots?
Yeah.
And we've given them time, extra time to count them, and yet that didn't seem to make a huge difference in August.
Well, what happened in Wayne County, and Kathy Garrett is an extraordinary, experienced, and committed county clerk who has an amazing staff that's doing a lot of great work, was a firewall issue, essentially a technical glitch that slowed down the transmission of results from local jurisdictions to the county level. We've now worked with the county clerk to resolve that, and it's something that I'm glad we've worked to resolve. The second county was Macomb County, where you actually had local clerks not deliver the results to the county in a timely fashion. So we're working with those who were, for whatever reason, delayed in doing that to help speed up their processes. Those are the two counties that we saw delays. We still are on track, just like we saw in 20, to have results, the unofficial results of the November elections completed within 24 hours of the polls closing and late on the day on Wednesday. And we'll continue to provide updates, especially as we go along that process. But yeah, we were, I think what I would see happened in Wayne County in August was an isolated incident. We're working to make sure it doesn't happen again, and grateful for the partnership with the county clerk in that.
And I mentioned absentee ballots going out this coming week. How many absentee ballots do you suppose are going to be cast? What's your projection this year?
Well, interestingly, because of COVID, we saw more people voting absentee at this stage in the process in 2020 than we do now. I would say maybe between 2 and 2.5 million of the 4.5 to 5 million projected to vote this year are going to be voting absentee. But we don't know. And voters have options this year. They could vote early in person.
Right. That's right.
And so we're going to make sure we meet voters wherever they are, whatever option they choose to vote. And I'll give you more updates as we get closer to November 5th.
I bet you we'll have you back before Election Day.
Certainly. Happy to come back
Secretary of State
anytime.
Jocelyn Benson, great to have you on the program again. Thanks so much. We come back, we'll talk about Detroit homecoming. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Back in 2014, Crane's Detroit business decided to invite Detroit expats back to the city for a Detroit homecoming. It took off, and this year it was the 11th edition of Detroit Homecoming. Very happy to have with me several of those who have come back to town. Keir Worthy is here, the hip-hop pioneer who has probably lost count of the artists that he's influenced and encouraged. Michael Shear of Atlanta Capital Group lives in L.A., back in Detroit, though, building student housing near his alma mater, which happens to be the University of Detroit. Emily Gale is, of course, the woman behind the phrase, say nice things about Detroit, and that wish has certainly come true. So many people do now. And Claire Pfeiffer is producing this year's homecoming, and she is with Crane's Detroit Business Gang. It's really great to have you all here.
It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful to be here.
Thank you.
Emily, I have to start with you because news broke earlier this year that after all these years in Hawaii, you're moving back to Detroit.
Well, I always wanted to, but Detroit homecoming is like the umbrella of my life. You know, everything I want to do has been shaped by what Detroit homecoming has brought into my life. Reconnecting with people. Inspiration, for sure. I mean, this week was amazing. The inspiration from all the speakers, the panelists. And the best part about this week's homecoming was that when I looked at the crowd, whether it was on the bus or over the dinner, the demographic of homecoming this year looked like the demographic of Detroit. It was so encouraging.
Yeah, nice.
Very happy.
And you're making plans to leave one paradise for another, right?
Well, I always tell everybody in Hawaii that there's no place I'd rather be in warm weather than Detroit.
Which is
much better than Hawaii.
Really great. Talk to me about the things that you guys heard this week. Here, let me start with you.
Okay. You know, Detroit homecoming, this is my fourth or fifth one. And I've been a staunch Detroiter my entire life. I live in New York. I've been there since 90, so a number of years now. But, you know, they say once you're in New York for 10 years, you're a New Yorker. And I'm always like, no, I'm a Detroiter that lives in New York.
Darn right.
You know, I think Detroit, you know, in New York they say if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. For me, I think if you make it in Detroit, you can go anywhere. You know, Detroit gives you a certain skill set, a certain confidence that you feel fine wherever you go. I've met Detroiters all over the world, and you just know them, right? And they've integrated very well. They're usually making some sort of moves. They're, you know, if not a position of power, a position of influence. And I think that comes from just the work ethic that's here, the I've got to probably be better than, because you always have the idea that places are better than you are, so you work harder, and you get there like, whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got more superlative skills than I thought. So.
Yeah, it's great, Michael. You've made it back for a number of these, so clearly Detroit's still under your fingernails after all this time.
This is my 9th out of the 11 homecomings, and I love coming back. We connect with new people. We connect with old people. It's always good to see old friends.
Sure.
But I'll tell you, some of the new people I've met on this particular event, it's like we'd known each other. And as Kira was saying, no matter where we go in the world, we're all Detroiters. Right? We had a marketing slogan at one point that was Detroiters of the world unite. And here we are, 11 years into homecoming, and this is where we unite. So it's great to be
hometown
back.
pride is, of course, a thing everywhere, but it does seem really intense. And Claire, I know that's part of what drove this to begin with, but you got to be, Cranes has got to just sort of, aren't you astonished with what this has become?
It's really had such an impact in ways that we can count and even ways we can't count. So our expats come from all over the world and they leave inspired to leave something in the city behind and stay in touch. We've had people open their business, move a business here. We've had investments. We've inspired, great restorations like we can point to Michigan Central as a discussion that started at a homecoming dinner. If you look on the east side, there's new housing, the Greatwater Homes over in the Little Village neighborhood. That is from a couple of our homecoming expats who were inspired to start, investing in the city and found ways to really make their mark.
You guys have found a way to calculate what that's about. The last number I saw was well over $500 million. Oh,
it's $1 billion.
We're $1 billion now? Yeah, really, really astonishing. Emily, the other part of it, though, is for when you all come back and you get to see what's changed since the last time you were here. It's a different place.
I haven't been for 5 years.
Okay, then just in 5 years.
And the difference is, I'm in culture shock, really. And everywhere, for 30 years in Hawaii, every day I've worn something with Detroit on it. A hat or a shirt or something. And I've rarely had anybody say anything other than, oh, I did my residency in Detroit and I loved it. Or some story about them, a family member living in Detroit, and it's always a favorable story. That it was much different than they anticipated, and like I say, Detroit love is a beautiful thing, and it's all over the world.
Well, and one of those beautiful things is Michigan Central. To come back and see what that is now.
Phenomenal.
Right?
Phenomenal. I mean, I had the good fortune of actually taking a train trip out of there when it was still functional, active. Matter of fact, my first train trip ever, my mom took me to California before the closure, so I got to see that magnificent thing and what they've done to it now. It was always a stellar structure. And I'm a big architecture fan. So seeing that was like amazing.
The same question.
When I was young, I wanted to be in architecture. I wanted to be an architect, and seeing the building the way it was, we had friends of mine and I would say, we need to buy that. We need to do something with that, no matter what it takes. And now here it is, this amazing structure brought back to life. I got to see it twice during the construction, and walking through the main doors today, I was just absolutely blown away. It is so beautiful, the reconstruction, and I love the way they kept some of the graffiti at the side entrance. That was cool. Very cool.
Me too. Claire, give me a thumbnail of what the take is as people came back this year, and not just the structures we're talking about, but Detroit's in the middle of a hot year between the NFL draft, the Lions, and their almost a run to the Super Bowl, on and on and on.
The Tigers. We're looking good all around. Right. I think people were happily surprised, if they hadn't been back in a while, by what they saw, and really impressed at where we are in just being downtown and it feeling so alive, and so many people out and so many shops to go to and restaurants they hadn't visited before. I think just the vibe in the city is so different than if they haven't been back in a couple decades.
Well, like 5 years.
Yeah,
4 to 5 years.
I'm amazed how many of my neighbors and people that I know in Hawaii tell me about things that are happening in Detroit.
Yes.
And they have an enthusiasm too, which is really exciting, because they're watching and they're telling me, and that shows that the world is watching, what's going on in Detroit.
And folks who watch this program always know how I feel about Detroit being the greatest music city in the history of the world. Kier, I believe that you take with you everywhere.
I have. It thrust me into the business, really. I did my first promotion over here. Then I ended up in Austin at the University of Texas.
Yep.
Worked on South
In
by
fact, you
Southwest.
brought hip-hop to Southwest.
I did, yeah.
South by Southwest.
South by Southwest.
Right.
And actually, Texas in general, really, because I started off in Houston. So my company was called High Wax Promotions and Marketing. My business partner, Worldwide, who's actually still in the business. He Erica Badu's attorney.
Oh, yeah.
And, we brought a ton of the acts from the East Coast to Texas over the years, and a lot of that came from being here in Detroit.
Sure.
And I try to tell people all the time, Austin took the mantle of the music capital, live music capital, but there's no more music going on there than Detroit every day.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Tell you what, I got to take a break, but I want to carry on our conversation over to Click on Detroit. Join us over there because I want to hear some of the favorite Detroit stories from my group here. We'll wrap things up for Flashpoint though right after this on Local 4. Quick programming note. This coming Tuesday, we're going to launch our first election town hall, partnering with Oakland University Center for Civic Engagement. Christy McDonald hosting the town hall from Oakland U starting at 12:30 this Tuesday. Meet the Press coming up next. See you next time for Flashpoint.